battle had ended 3 hours ago, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the explosions that came before it. Fleet Captain Marcus Venn stood on the observation deck of the ironclad Resolve, watching the debris field drift past his warship like a graveyard of metal and memories. Pieces of destroyed ships floated in the darkness, spinning slowly, catching the light of distant stars before disappearing into shadow again. He had commanded this vessel for 7 years now, and he had seen many battles, but this one had been different. The enemy had fought with desperation, throwing everything they had at the human fleet, and when it was over, nothing remained of their armada but scattered wreckage and silence. Marcus was tired in a way that sleep could not fix. He was 52 years old, and he had spent 30 of those years serving in the fleet. His hair had turned gray at the temples, and lines had carved themselves into his face like maps of all the places he had been and all the things he had seen. Turned away from the window and walked toward the command center, his boots echoing on the metal floor. His first officer, Commander Elena Vasquez, met him halfway down the corridors. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, and she had served with Marcus for the past 4 years. Captain, she said, the salvage teams have returned with their reports. Anything useful? Marcus asked. Mostly scrap metal and damaged equipment, Elena replied. But there is something else. Her voice carried a strange note that made Marcus stop walking. What kind of something else? He asked. Elena hesitated, which was unusual for her. She was not the type of person who struggled to find words. The team found a creature in the wreckage. She finally said, it appears to be injured, but alive. What kind of creature? Marcus asked. Elena looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. You should come see for yourself. Captain. They walked together through the winding corridors of the warship, past crew members who saluted as they passed, past humming machinery and blinking control panels. The ironclad Resolve was a massive vessel, nearly 3 kilometers long, built for war and nothing else. Everything about it was hard and cold and designed for a single purpose. Marcus had lived inside this machine for so long that he sometimes forgot what softness felt like. They reached the cargo bay where the salvage team had brought their findings. Several crew members stood in a loose circle around something on the floor, speaking in hushed voices. They parted when they saw the captain approaching. Marcus stopped walking when he saw what lay in the center of the circle. It was a dragon. The creature was small, no larger than a medium-sized dog, with scales that shimmered in deep shades of green and gold. Its wings were folded against its body, but one of them was clearly damaged, the delicate membrane torn in several places. One of its eyes was swollen shut, and dark blood had dried along a gash on its side, but its other eye was open, watching the humans around it with a mixture of fear and defiance that struck Marcus somewhere deep in his chest. He had heard stories about dragons when he was a child. Long before he joined the fleet, his grandmother had told him tales of the ancient bond between humans and dragons, of a time when the two species had lived together in partnership and trust. But that was centuries ago, before humans had discovered how valuable dragon bones and blood could be. Bounty hunts had begun, and they had not stopped until dragons were nearly extinct. Most people believed they were completely gone now. Nothing but legends and old stories. Yet here was one, injured and afraid, lying on the cold floor of his cargo basur. One of the salvage team members said, "We found it floating in a damaged escape pod. It must have been trying to flee the battle. When it got caught in the crossfire, what should we do with it?" Elena asked. Her voice was carefully neutral, but Marcus could hear the unspoken suggestion beneath her words. Regulations required him to report any discovery of a rare species to fleet command. Dragons were classified as valuable biological assets, which meant this creature would be taken away, studied, and probably dissected. Collectors and scientists would pay fortunes for a live dragon. Creature seemed to understand that its fate was being decided. It tried to lift its head, letting out a small sound that was half growl and half whimper. The movement seemed to cause it pain. And it lowered its head again, its golden eyes still fixed on Marcus. He looked at that eye for a long moment. He saw pain there, and fear, and exhaustion, but he also saw something else. Something that reminded him of himself. He saw a survivor everyone out. Marcus said suddenly. The crew members looked at each other in confusion. Sir. Elena began. I said everyone out. Marcus repeated, his voice carrying the authority of a man who was not used to being questioned. I need to assess this situation privately. Elena held his gaze for a moment, and something passed between them she had known him long enough to recognize. When he was about to do something that could not be undone, but she also trusted him. Even when she did not understand him. Yes, Captain, she said. And she ushered the crew members out of the cargo bay. The door slid shut behind them, and Marcus was alone with the dragon. He walked closer to the creature. Moving slowly so as not to frighten it, the dragon watched him approach. Its body tense, ready to fight even though it clearly lacked the strength. Easy, Marcus said softly, kneeling down a few feet away from Heidi. I'm not going to hurt you. Dragon made a low sound in its throat. Neither aggressive nor trusting, just waiting. Marcus looked at the creature. Really looked at it, taking in the beauty of its scales despite the injuries. The intelligence shining in its one good eye. The stubborn will to live that radiated from every part of its small body. He thought about regulations and duty and all the things he was supposed to do. He thought about the fortune this creature represented, the promotions and rewards that would come from reporting such a discovery. Then he thought about his grandmother and her stories of partnership and trust. He thought about what humans had done to dragons and what that said about humanity, and he made a decision. I am going to help you, he told the dragon, his voice barely above a whisper. I do not know how yet, but I am going to find a way to keep you safe. The dragon stared at him, and for just a moment, something shifted in its golden eye. The fear did not disappear entirely, but something else appeared alongside it, something that might have been the very first spark of hope. Marcus stood up and took a deep breath. He had just committed himself to harboring an illegal creature on a military vessel, lying to his superiors, and risking his entire career. He should have felt afraid instead. He felt something he had not experienced in a very long time. He felt like he was finally doing something that mattered. Hold on, he said to the dragon as he turned toward the door. I will be back soon, and when I return, I am going to get you somewhere safe. The dragon made a soft sound, almost like an acknowledgement, and in that cold cargo bay, inside a warship built for destruction, a strange and unlikely friendship began to take its first tentative steps. Marcus spent the next several hours thinking about where he could hide a dragon on a warship filled with 800 crew members. The ironclad Resolve was vast, but it was also designed with military precision. Every room had a purpose, every corridor was patrolled, and every system was monitored. Finding a secret space seemed almost impossible. But Marcus had lived on this ship for 7 years, and he knew it better than anyone else. He knew about the forgotten corners and abandoned sections, the places that had been sealed off and forgotten when the ship was rebuilt after old battles. And he remembered one place in particular, deep in the lower sections of the ship, behind the auxiliary water recyclers. There was a maintenance corridor that led nowhere. It had been part of the original ship design, meant to provide access to systems that had later been removed and replaced. The architects had simply sealed it off, rather than tearing it out. And over the years it had been forgotten entirely. It did not appear on any active maps or maintenance schedules. Marcus found the old access panel late that night. When most of the crew was asleep, the panel was covered in years of dust and grime, and it took him nearly an hour to pry it open without making too much noise behind. It was a narrow corridor that stretched about 20 meters, before ending in a small chamber. The chamber was dark and cold and empty, but it was also completely hidden from the rest of the ship. It was perfect. Getting the dragon from the cargo bay to the hidden chamber was the most dangerous part of the plan. Marcus waited until the deepest hours of the night shift. When the corridors were at their emptiest, he had wrapped the dragon in a thermal blanket to hide her distinctive scales, and he carried her in his arms like she was simply a piece of equipment being transported. The dragon seemed to understand the need for silence. She did not move or make any sound as Marcus walked through the dim corridors, his heart pounding with every stepwise. He had to duck into side passages to avoid passing crew members. Once, a security officer walked right past him without a second glance. Finally, they reached the hidden corridor. Marcus squeezed through the narrow opening and carried the dragon to the chamber at the end. He set her down gently on the cold floor and felt a wave of relief wash over him. "We made it," he whispered. The dragon looked up at him, her golden eye gleaming faintly in the darkness. She made a soft sound that might have been agreement, but this place was not fit for any living creature. Not yet. The chamber was freezing cold and completely bare. If the dragon was going to survive here, Marcus would need to transform it into something livable, and so began the work that would consume his every free moment. For the next several weeks, Marcus started by studying everything he could find about dragons. The information was scarce, since most records had been destroyed or classified after the hunt ended, but he pieced together enough to understand the basics. Dragons were warm-blooded creatures who needed heat to thrive. They ate primarily proteins, but required specific nutrients that were difficult to replicate. Their scales needed humidity to stay healthy, and their wings needed space to stretch and heal. He began to build every night. After his official duties were complete, Marcus would slip down to the hidden chamber and work. He installed heating coils along the walls, carefully connecting them to the ship's power grid in ways that would not be easily detected. He lined the floor with insulating material that he had taken from storage, claiming it was needed for repairs in other sections. He brought in soft fabrics and cushions, creating a nest-like area where the dragon could rest comfortably. The work was slow and exhausting, but Marcus found that he did not mind. There was something deeply satisfying about building with his hands, about creating something meant for comfort rather than destruction. He had spent so many years commanding a machine of war that he had forgotten what it felt like to make something gentle. The dragon watched him work with increasing interest. In the beginning, she stayed huddled in the corner, her one good eye following his movements with wary attention. But as the days passed and the chamber began to warm up, she started to relax. She would uncurl from her defensive position and stretch her injured wing. Testing it carefully, she began to eat the modified protein supplements that Marcus brought her, and he could see her growing stronger. Marcus started talking to her while he worked, partly to fill the silence and partly because it felt natural. He told her about his life, about the battles he had fought, about the loneliness that came with command. He told her about his grandmother and her stories, about how he had dreamed of meeting a dragon when he was a boy. He did not know if she understood his words, but she seemed to listen, tilting her head and watching him with that intelligent golden eye. On the 12th night, something wonderful happened. Marcus had just finished installing a humidity system that would keep the air moist enough for healthy scales. He sat down heavily on the floor, exhausted but satisfied with his progress. The dragon stood up from her nest and walked over to him on unsteady legs. She was still weak, but she was moving better than before. She stopped right in front of him and looked at his face for a long moment. She pressed her snout against his hand and made a sound unlike anything Marcus had heard before. It was a deep, rumbling vibration that seemed to come from somewhere inside her chest, rolling through her body like distant thunder. But it was warm thunder, gentle thunder, the kind of sound that made Marcus think of safety and contentment. She was purring. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes, and he was not ashamed of them in that moment. Sitting in a hidden chamber aboard a warship with a dragon purring against his hand, He felt something crack open inside his heart. He had been alone for so long. Surrounded by people but never truly connected to any of them. Command was isolating by nature, and the weight of responsibility had built walls around him that he had not even noticed. But this creature, this small and injured dragon, had found a way through those walls. She trusted him. Even though her kind had every reason to fear and hate humans, she had chosen to believe in his kindness. And that belief felt like the most precious gift he had ever received. "I need to give you a name," Marcus said softly, stroking the smooth scales of her head. He thought about her golden eye, about the way it had gleamed with defiance even when she was at her weakest. Thought about how she had survived against all odds, burning with the will to live. Ember. He said, "Finally, I'm going to call you Ember." The dragon Ember made another purring sound as if she approved of the name, and in that hidden chamber, warm and safe and far from the cold universe outside, a man and a dragon began to build something that neither of them had expected to find. They began to build a home. Secrets have a way of escaping, no matter how carefully they are kept. Marcus had been hiding Ember for nearly a month when the first person discovered the truth. Chief Engineer Yuki Tanaka was a woman who noticed everything. She had served on the ironclad Resolve for 12 years, longer than anyone else aboard, and she knew every system on the ship like she knew her own heartbeat. So, when the power consumption reports showed a small but consistent drain from an area that should have been completely inactive, she decided to investigate. Yuki followed the power lines through the maintenance tunnels, tracking the unauthorized usage with the patience of someone solving a puzzle. She crawled through narrow spaces and squeezed past old machinery until she found the hidden access panel that Marcus had carefully concealed. She pried it open and made her way down the forgotten corridor. What she found at the end made her stop and stare in complete silence. The chamber had been transformed. Soft lighting cast a warm glow over walls lined with fabric and heating coils. A nest of cushions and blankets occupied one corner, and the air was humid and comfortable in there. Curled up in the nest was a dragon. Yuki did not scream or run away. She stood in the doorway, taking in the scene with wide eyes, her mind processing what she was seeing. The dragon lifted its head and looked at her, its golden eye alert but not hostile. Before Yuki could decide what to do, she heard footsteps behind her. Marcus appeared in the corridor, carrying a container of food for Ember. He saw Yuki and froze, his face going pale for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Yuki turned to face her captain, and instead of accusation, there was curiosity in her eyes. "How long have you been hiding a dragon on my ship?" she asked. Marcus let out a breath. He had not realized he was holding about a month. He admitted. Yuki nodded slowly, looking back at Ember. "The heating system you installed is inefficient," she said. "You are losing about 30% of your energy to poor insulation. I could help you fix that." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "You are not going to report me?" he asked. Yuki shrugged. "I have spent 12 years maintaining machines designed to kill people," she said. "Maybe it is time I helped maintain something designed to live." The second person to discover the secret was Dr. Samuel Asay, the ship's chief medical officer. He was a gentleman in his 60s with kind eyes and steady hands, and he had patched up more wounded soldiers than he could count. One evening, Marcus came to him with questions that made no sense. He wanted to know about wing membrane regeneration, about specialized protein requirements, about treating injuries to scaled skin. Samuel listened to these strange questions with growing suspicion. Marcus, he finally said, "I have known you for 5 years, and I have never seen you show the slightest interest in xenobiology. What is going on?" Marcus hesitated, but he knew he needed help. Ember's wing was healing slowly, and he was worried that he might be doing something wrong. He made a decision to trust Samuel with the truth. "What I am about to show you could end both of our careers." Marcus said, "I understand if you want to walk away." Samuel smiled slightly. "I became a doctor to help living things." He replied, "Show me what you need." That night, Samuel followed Marcus to the hidden chamber. When he saw Ember, his eyes filled with wonder. He knelt down beside her and examined her wing with gentle fingers, murmuring soft words as he worked. "She is magnificent." Samuel said quietly, "I thought they were all gone." "So did everyone," Marcus replied. Samuel spent the next hour examining Ember thoroughly, checking her injuries and her overall health. He asked questions and made notes, and when he was finished, he sat back with a satisfied expression. "Her wing is healing well," he said, "but she needs specific nutrients that your synthetic proteins are not providing. I can modify the formula for you." He paused and looked at Marcus with serious eyes. "You know that if anyone finds out about this, we could all face court-martial." "I know," Marcus said. Samuel nodded and stood up. "Then we had better make sure no one finds out." The third person to join the secret was the most unexpected. Junior Lieutenant Priya Shah was only 23 years old, the youngest officer on the ship. She had joined the fleet to escape a difficult life on her home world, hoping that military service would give her a sense of purpose and belonging, but the reality of warship life had been harder than she expected. Confined spaces and constant pressure triggered anxiety attacks that she struggled to hide from her fellow officers. One night, Priya felt the familiar tightness building in her chest as she walked through the crowded corridors. She could not breathe, could not think, and she knew she needed to find somewhere quiet before anyone saw her falling apart. She ducked into a maintenance tunnel and kept walking, desperate for solitude, until she stumbled through an access panel and found herself in a warm, softly lit chamber. Ember was alone, Marcus having left earlier to attend to his duties. The dragon looked up at the trembling young woman who had just appeared in her home. Priya stared at the dragon with tear-streaked cheeks, her breath coming in short gasps. She should have been terrified instead. She felt something in her chest begin to loosen. Ember stood up and walked slowly toward the frightened human. She stopped a few feet away and made a low, rumbling sound, the same purr that Marcus had come to love. Then she lay down on the floor and rested her head on her front legs, looking up at Priya with calm, patient eyes without knowing why. Priya sat down on the floor beside the dragon. Ember shifted closer and pressed her warm snout against Priya's trembling hands. The heat of her body and the steady rhythm of her purring wrapped around Priya like a blanket. For the first time in months, Priya felt safe. When Marcus returned an hour later, he found the young lieutenant asleep on the floor, her head resting against Ember's side, both of them breathing peacefully. He should have been angry or afraid that another person had discovered his secret. Instead, he carefully covered Priya with a blanket and let her sleep. The next day, he told her everything. Priya became a regular visitor to the hidden chamber, and her anxiety attacks became less frequent and less severe. She helped Marcus and Yuki improve the living space, bringing small comforts like soft music players and colored lights. Samuel continued to monitor Ember's health and adjust her diet. The four of them formed an unlikely family around the dragon. They had all agreed to protect. None of them reported him. All of them helped him build in the heart of a warship. Something extraordinary was growing. A community of people who had chosen compassion over regulation, who had decided that some things were more important than following orders. They did not know yet how much that choice would cost them, but they also did not know how much it would eventually give them. For now, they simply worked together, building a home for a dragon who had somehow become the most important thing on the ship. The message arrived on a quiet morning, and it changed everything. Marcus was in his quarters reviewing patrol reports when his communication panel lit up with an urgent transmission from Fleet Command. He read the message twice, his heart sinking with each word. Admiral Chun was coming. A surprise inspection had been ordered for the ironclad Resolve, scheduled to begin in 48 hours. Admiral Chun was known throughout the fleet as a woman who missed nothing. She had built her career on finding problems that others had overlooked, and she took pride in her thorough examinations of every ship under her command. If she came aboard and conducted a full inspection, she would find the power drain that Yuki had tried to hide. She would find the modified protein supplies that Samuel had been creating. She would find Ember. Marcus called an emergency meeting in the hidden chamber that night. Yuki, Samuel, and Priya gathered around him, their faces reflecting the same fear that was churning in his stomach. "We have 2 days," Marcus said, his voice heavy. 2 days before Admiral Chun arrives and discovers everything we have been doing. What are options? Yuki asked. Marcus had been thinking about this since the moment he received the message. There are only 2 choices. He said we can move Ember off the ship entirely, find some way to release her into space with enough supplies to survive until she can find somewhere safe, or we hide her and hope the Admiral does not look hard enough to find her. Neither option felt right. Releasing Ember into space was essentially a death sentence. No matter how many supplies they gave her, she was strong now, her wing almost fully healed. But she could not survive alone in the void for long, and hiding her from Admiral Chun seemed almost impossible. The woman was famous for her attention to detail. Samuel shook his head slowly. There is a third option, he said quietly. We could surrender her, turn her over to the Admiral before she even starts looking. We might be able to negotiate better treatment for Ember if we cooperate. Priya made a sharp sound of protest. No, she said firmly. They would take her away. They would study her and hurt her and probably kill her eventually. We cannot let that happen. Marcus looked at the young lieutenant, seeing the fierce determination in her eyes. She had grown so much in the weeks since she had first stumbled into Ember's chamber. The anxious girl who had been falling apart was becoming a brave woman who stood up for what she believed in. Priya is right, Marcus said. Surrender is not an option. He took a deep breath and looked at each of his friends in turn. Listen to me carefully, he continued. If we try to hide Ember and we fail, all of us will face court-martial. We could spend years in prison. Our careers will be over, our reputations destroyed. I cannot ask you to take that risk. I am ordering you to deny everything. Say that I forced you to help, that you had no choice, that you did not know what I was doing. I will take full responsibility. Yuki's jaw tightened. With respect, Captain, that is not going to happen. Samuel nodded in agreement. We made our choice when we decided to help, he said. We are not going to abandon you. Now Priya stepped closer to Marcus and put her hand on his arm. We are a family, she said simply. Families stick together. Marcus felt emotions swell in his chest. Gratitude and love and terrible fear all mixed together. He had spent his whole career believing that command meant standing alone, carrying burdens that could not be shared. But these 3 people had shown him a different way. They had shown him that strength could come from connection, from trust, from choosing to face danger together. He turned to look at Ember, who had been watching the conversation with her bright golden eyes. She had grown so much since he first found her in that debris field. Her scales gleamed with health, her wing moved freely, and her body radiated strength and vitality. But more than that, she had changed in ways that went beyond the physical. There was wisdom in her eyes now, and something that looked almost like determination. As Marcus watched, Ember stood up from her nest and walked to the center of the chamber. She looked at each of the humans in turn, holding their gazes with an intensity that made the air feel thick and charged. Then she did something that none of them expected. She opened her mouth and spoke. The voice that emerged was unlike any human sounded. Was like wind rushing through crystal caves, like water flowing over ancient stones, like music from an instrument that had not been played in centuries. It was beautiful and strange, and it sent shivers down Marcus's spine. Do not sacrifice yourselves for me, Ember said. Her words were careful and slow, as if she was remembering how to use a language she had not spoken in a very long time. Marcus stared at her in shock. "You can talk." He whispered. Ember inclined her head, and what might have been a nod. "My kind spoke to humans long ago," she said. "Before fear and greed destroyed the partnership between our peoples, I have been listening to you, learning your language again, waiting to see if you were worthy of trust." She paused and looked directly at Marcus. "You have proven that you are." 4 humans stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they were hearing. Ember continued, her crystal voice filling the chamber. "I was not caught in that battle by accident," she explained. "I was searching. My people have survived in hiding for centuries, waiting for a sign that humanity had changed, that there might be hope for a new beginning. When I heard about your ship, about the captain who showed mercy to prisoners and fairness to his crew, I came to find you. I wanted to see if the stories were true." "What stories?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. "Stories of humans who remembered the old ways," Ember replied. "Humans who valued life over profit, compassion over conquest. I found you injured and dying in that wreckage." Marcus said, "I found what I was looking for," Ember answered, and a hint of warmth entered her strange voice. "A human who would save a dragon instead of selling Harry. Have watched you build this place with your own hands. I have seen you sacrifice your sleep and risk your freedom to keep me safe. I have seen your friends choose loyalty over lore." Golden eyes seemed to glow. "You have given me hope," she said. "Now let me give you a chance." Ember told him her plan. Speaking in that haunting voice for nearly an hour, she explained things about her kind that humans had forgotten or never known. She told them about abilities that dragons possessed, about the role they had once played in human society, about what they could offer if given the chance, and she told them about the hidden colonies where the last dragons still survived, watching and waiting for a sign. When she finished speaking, silence filled the chamber. Then Marcus began to smile. "It might actually work," he said. "It is certainly better than anything else we have come up with," Yuki added. Samuel laughed, a sound of surprised delight. "I never thought I would live to see the day," he said. Priya was crying, but her tears were happy ones. She knelt down and wrapped her arms around Ember's neck, hugging the dragon fiercely. The 4 humans and the dragon spent the rest of the night preparing. There was much to do and very little time to do it, but for the first time since receiving the Admiral's message, Marcus felt something other than dread. He felt hope, and he realized that hope had been Ember's gift to him from the very beginning. Admiral Chun's shuttle docked with the ironclad Resolve at exactly 900 hours. Precisely on schedule. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see through walls. In her 40 years of service, she had inspected hundreds of ships and uncovered countless violations, hidden problems, and secret failures. Nothing escaped her notice. The crew of the ironclad Resolve stood at attention in the main hangar as the Admiral walked down the ramp from her shuttle, followed by her team of inspection officers. Every uniform was perfect, every piece of equipment polished to a shine. The ship had never looked better. Admiral Chun walked past the assembled crew with barely a glance, heading straight for Fleet Captain Marcus Venn. "Captain," she said, her voice crisp and formal, "I trust you are prepared for a thorough inspection." "Yes, Admiral," Marcus replied, his face carefully neutral. "However, before we begin, there is something I need to show you, something of great importance." The Admiral raised one eyebrow. "This is highly irregular." "Captain, I assure you, Admiral, this cannot wait." Marcus turned and gestured for the Admiral to follow him. Admiral Chun hesitated for a moment, her suspicious eyes studying his face. Then she nodded curtly and fell into step beside him. They walked through the corridors of the warship, past crew members who stood at rigid attention as they passed. The Admiral's inspection team tried to follow, but Marcus held up his hand. "This is for the Admiral's eyes only," he said firmly. "At least for now." Admiral Chun gave him a long look, but did not argue. She dismissed her team with a wave and continued walking beside Marcus alone, they traveled deep into the ship, through sections that were rarely visited, down maintenance corridors that grew narrower and dimmer. Finally, they reached a door that the Admiral had never seen on any ship schematic. Marcus stopped and turned to face her Admiral. He said, "What I am about to show, you could end my career. It could also change the future of humanity's relationship with other species. I am asking you to keep an open mind, Admiral." Chen's expression did not change. "I have kept an open mind for 40 years, Captain." She replied, "Show me what you have found." Marcus opened the door and led the Admiral into the hidden chamber. What she saw made her stop in her tracks. The room was warm and softly lit, filled with comfortable furnishings and gentle sounds. And there, standing in the center of the room with her head held high and her scales gleaming like emeralds in sunlight, was Ember. The Admiral stared at the dragon, her composure cracking for the first time in longer than she could remember. "That is a dragon," she whispered. "Yes," Marcus said, "and she has something to say to you." Ember stepped forward, moving with a grace that made her seem to flow rather than walk. She stopped a few feet from the Admiral and looked directly into the woman's eyes. Her crystal voice filled the chamber when she spoke. "Admiral Chun," she said, "I speak to you in the old formal tongue that my ancestors once used with human leaders. I come not as a curiosity to be studied or a resource to be exploited, but as an ambassador." "An ambassador," the Admiral repeated, her voice faint with shock. Ember nodded her elegant head. "For centuries, my kind is hidden from humanity," she continued. "We watched as you spread across the stars, building empires and fighting wars. We saw you destroy and create, fail and triumph, and we waited, hoping that someday you would change, that you would become the partners we once knew, rather than the hunters we had learned to fear." The Admiral listened in silence, a sharp mind processing every word. "Fleet Captain Marcus Venn gave me that hope. Ember said he found me dying in the wreckage of a battle and chose to save me. He built me a home in the heart of a warship, a place of gentleness inside a machine of war. He risked everything to protect a creature that should have been his enemy." She turned to look at Marcus with warmth in her golden eye. "He showed me that humanity can still choose compassion over conquest," she said, "and he is not alone." She gestured with her wing toward the door, where Yuki, Samuel, and Priya had quietly entered the chamber. "These humans chose the same path," Ember continued. "They chose to help, to protect, to build something beautiful in a place designed for destruction. They have proven to me that the old partnership between our peoples might be possible once again." Admiral Chun stood very still for a long moment. Then she turned to look at Marcus. "You know that what you have done violates at least a dozen regulations," she said. "Yes, Admiral," Marcus replied, "and you know that I should place you under arrest and seize this creature for study." "Yes." Admiral Chun was quiet for another long moment. Then, slowly, something changed in her face. The hardness that had defined her for 40 years seemed to soften. "Just slightly. I have spent my entire career following regulations," she said quietly. "I have always believed that order and discipline were the highest virtues, that rules existed for good reasons and should never be broken." She looked at Ember, at Marcus, at the three others who had risked everything to protect the dragon. "But perhaps," she continued, "there are some things that matter more than rules. Perhaps there are moments when compassion should outweigh protocol. What are you saying?" "Admiral," Marcus asked, hardly daring to hope. Admiral Chun straightened her spine and looked Ember directly in the eye. "I'm saying that I would like to hear more about this partnership you mentioned," she said. "I am saying that if there are dragons willing to speak with humanity, then humanity should be willing to listen." 6 months later, the ironclad Resolve was officially redesignated as the first human dragon diplomatic vessel. Admiral Chun had used every ounce of her influence to push the change through Fleet Command, and she had succeeded. The ship that had once been built for war was now a symbol of hope. Ember's chamber was expanded into proper diplomatic quarters, with space for other dragons who had begun to emerge from hiding. Representatives from the hidden colonies came to meet with human leaders, and slowly, carefully, a new relationship began to form. But Ember still preferred to spend her nights in the original chamber, the small warm space that Marcus had built with his own hands, and Marcus still came to visit her there. Sitting in the warmth while she curled around him and purred, Yuki remained the chief engineer, though now she spent as much time designing dragon-friendly systems as she did maintaining weapons. Samuel became the leading expert on dragon medicine, writing papers that would change xenobiology forever. Rhea, no longer troubled by anxiety, became the ship's liaison officer, helping humans and dragons learn to understand each other. They were still a family, bound together by the secret they had kept and the choice they had made one night. Marcus sat in Ember's original chamber, watching the lights dance on the walls. "It is strange," he said softly. "I spent 30 years learning to destroy things, and now I am part of something meant to heal old wounds." Ember lifted her head and rested it on his knee. "That is what makes you special," she said in her crystal voice. "You learned to be something other than what you were trained to be. You chose gentleness when the world expected you to choose war." Marcus stroked her scales, feeling the warmth radiate through his handi. "Could not have done it without you," he said. "Without you, none of this would have happened." Ember made her purring sound, the one that still reminded Marcus of warm thunder. "We saved each other," she replied. "That is what partners do." Outside the chamber, the stars wheeled slowly past the ship's windows. The ironclad Resolve sailed through the darkness of space, no longer a weapon of war but a bridge between two species who had once been enemies. And inside that ship, in a small chamber that had been built with love and hope and determination, a man and a dragon sat together in comfortable silence. They did not need words. They were home. This was how Marcus had always imagined his life would end, surrounded by cold metal and the vast emptiness of space. But instead, his life had been transformed into something warmer and more wonderful than he ever could have imagined. Had created something gentle in a place designed for violence. He had built a home for his dragon friend, and in doing so, he had finally found a home for himself.